In our last episode, we talked about how Timur's horsemen had routed the Ottomans at the Battle of Ankara in 1402, throwing the empire into civil war. That civil war would last another half-century, leaving the Ottomans weakened and vulnerable. And while Timur's grandson was ultimately able to restore the dynasty, his empire wouldn't last long because in 1453, a thunderclap shook the world. Constantinople, the proud capital of Byzantium, fell to Mehmed II of the Ottomans. The city was renamed Istanbul and became the beating heart of a powerful Muslim empire that stretched across the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. Under Suleiman the Magnificent, who reigned from 1494 to 1566, the Ottomans became a bona fide superpower, one that Europeans both admired and feared. They marveled at Ottoman law, which was comprehensive, fair, and efficient. They gawked at Ottoman architecture, especially the great mosques built by Sinan the architect, including this one, the Süleymani Mosque in Istanbul. And Europeans also feared the Ottoman armies, especially under the brilliant general and tactician Sakalu Mehmet Pasha, who achieved victories against the Habsburgs in Hungary and the Safavids in the Middle East. By the mid-16th century, Sakalu's troops had pushed deep into Central Europe, conquering Belgrade in 1521 and taking the Hungarian royal family captive. In fact, it was only thanks to Sakalu's death that Vienna was unsacked and possibly even incorporated into the Ottoman Empire. As it was, his successor, the Grand Vizier, Rustam Pasha, lay siege to Vienna in 1529, but would fail to take the city. Still, by that point, the Ottoman Empire was unquestionably a major power, one that dominated the eastern Mediterranean and controlled crucial trade routes between Asia and Europe. But most important of all, the Ottomans held Istanbul, a city that controlled the Silk Road. This meant that European merchants could no longer depend on overland trade with Asia. If they wanted spices, silk, or porcelain, they'd have to go around Africa or through the Middle East and then up the Persian Gulf. Both routes were treacherous, expensive, and slow. And so Europeans began to think about finding a sea route to India instead. Men like the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama, who first reached India via the Arabian Sea. In 1498, Christopher Columbus, who, though he never actually reached India, proved that there was a western sea route to the east, and Ferdinand Magellan, whose crew circumnavigated the globe between 1519 and 1522, proving that the Earth was indeed round and opening up the Pacific Ocean to European exploration and colonization. Now, none of these explorers would have been able to do what they did if not for the rise of the Ottomans, who coincidentally benefited greatly from the resulting age of discovery as well. In fact, it was the Ottomans who first created the conditions that made European exploration possible, and then they participated in it themselves. To understand how the Ottomans accomplished this, let us start with what everyone knows about the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453. It was a spectacular feat of arms by Mehmed II. It was a brilliant military commander. It was the last gasp of Byzantine survival. It was the beginning of Ottoman greatness. All of these things are true. But many historians also argue that the fall of Constantinople is massively overrated. Sure, it was an important event, but let's be honest. By the 15th century, the Byzantine emperor was little more than a figurehead. Even before Timur showed up in 1402, the Ottomans had de facto conquered most of the Balkans, and after Timur's victory over Bazidai at Ankara, rival Ottoman princes had carved out independent states in Anatolia, while Venice and Genoa carved out slices of the Byzantine merchant marine. And finally, the Orthodox Church had long ago separated from Rome, focusing inward rather than looking to the west. So when Constantinople fell, it didn't really matter all that much. It certainly mattered to the Ottomans and to Europe. But for Byzantium, it was just sort of the status quo. But now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about what actually happened in 1453. See, by the time Mehmed came to power, the Ottomans already controlled much of the Balkans. Their troops regularly harassed the Byzantines, and their navy dominated the Aegean. So for the people living in and around Constantinople, the Ottomans weren't exactly foreign invaders. They were practically next-door neighbors. And these neighbors had some pretty interesting ideas. You see, the Ottomans were Muslim. They were tolerant of other religions, but they weren't tolerant of other political systems. The Ottomans viewed the Byzantines as godless infidels, sure, but they also saw them as political rivals. The Orthodox Church viewed itself as the one true heir of Rome, and for centuries, Orthodox rulers had claimed that title for themselves, too. In fact, many Byzantine emperors called themselves the two-headed eagle, referencing Rome and Constantinople. Mehmed II thought that was nonsense. And once he conquered the city, he wanted to put an end to the idea that Byzantium had any claim on Roman heritage. And so, despite the fact that most of Constantinople's population was Christian, Mehmed declared the city officially Muslim. He ordered the construction of mosques and madrasas. He built a new legal code based on Islamic law, and he enforced Sharia across the city. Now Mehmed was careful not to go too far. For one thing, his empire was still overwhelmingly Turkish, and he couldn't suddenly turn his army and bureaucracy Muslim. But perhaps more importantly, the people of Constantinople just didn't care. Sure, there were riots and rebellions in the early years after the conquest, but by the middle of the 15th century, it seems that the bulk of the Christian population had either converted to Islam or simply stopped caring about religion altogether. Today, this period is often known as the Greek Lament, a time when Greek culture turned inward, away from the legacy of Rome and Byzantium, and focused on the present reality of Ottoman rule. In literature, historians see this as a reaction to the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople. In art, it's visible in the palimpsest style, which incorporates both Christian and Ottoman motifs. And in architecture, it can be seen in buildings like this church-turned-mosque, the Fethi Mosque, which blends Byzantine and Ottoman design. Okay, so Mehmed II made Constantinople Muslim, but that doesn't explain how the Ottomans facilitated the Age of Discovery. Well, that's where trade comes in. You see, Mehmed inherited a significant trading empire from his father, Murad II. The Ottomans had been great at collecting taxes on merchants traveling along the Silk Road, and Mehmed's focus on stability and prosperity in the aftermath of Timur's invasion made his empire even more attractive to merchants, especially given that Constantinople was a vital link between East and West. So while Mehmed ruled in the name of Islam, he was very happy to collect taxes from Jewish, Christian, and Muslim merchants alike. In fact, throughout the 15th and 16th centuries, the Ottoman Empire was the single biggest collector of taxes on the Silk Road. They taxed each individual good that passed through their borders, from bales of Chinese silk to Venetian glass to Indian cotton. And those taxes funded the Ottoman war machine, which enabled the Ottomans to conquer more land, which in turn meant more tax revenue. And the men who collected that revenue were often the same ones who participated in the spice trade themselves, starting with the Sultan's wife, the famous Hurrem Sultan, who bought a small island off the coast of Crimea and used it to grow tomatoes, cucumbers, citrus fruits, and other luxury goods she could sell in the market. Then there was Sakalu Mehmet Pasha, the brilliant general and tactician who helped transform the Ottoman army into one of the most effective fighting forces in the medieval world. After retiring from the military, he went into trade, amassing huge wealth in the process. Finally, there was the Sultan's brother Ahmed the Copper, who reportedly got his nickname from his habit of lining his pockets with copper coins instead of carrying gold or silver. He too amassed a fortune running ships along the Silk Road. The bottom line is that the men and women who led the Ottoman Empire often profited personally from the trade they regulated. So when they heard about these new sea routes to Asia, they paid close attention. We don't know for sure whether Mehmed II himself was interested in exploration. The man died in 1481 before the significance of Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic was clear, but his successors certainly were. In 1497, for instance, the Ottomans sent an envoy to Lisbon to find out all they could about these new sea routes to India. And when Selim the Grim conquered Egypt in 1516, he gained control of the Red Sea, as well as the port city of Jeddah, which gave the Ottomans access to Mecca and Medina. This made it easier for Muslim merchants to travel to Arabia's holy sites, which in turn attracted even more merchants to the Ottoman Empire. By the time Suleiman the Magnificent took power in 1520, the Ottoman Empire was perfectly positioned to take advantage of the growing European appetite for Asian goods. Its navy dominated the Mediterranean. Its ports and warehouses were located along key shipping routes, and its vast network of spies and informants kept Ottoman merchants informed about prices and demand in distant markets. Furthermore, by conquering large swaths of Central Europe, the Ottomans had opened up new markets for their own manufactured goods. Finally, the Ottoman Empire was multicultural, multilingual, and experienced. For decades, the sultans had run a vast and complex bureaucracy, and that bureaucracy was full of talented individuals who knew how to collect taxes, build roads, enforce contracts, and manage merchant guilds. All of which made the Ottoman Empire extremely attractive to merchants, both local and European. And so, right as Portugal, Spain, and Britain were beginning to carve up the non-European world, the Ottoman Empire was carving up the Eurasian landmass, becoming an economic and military powerhouse in the process. Next time, on the epic history of the Ottoman Empire, Part 3, the Gunpowder Empires. See you then. In 1498, Vasco da Gama, an explorer sailing for Portugal, arrived at the city of Calicut on the southwest coast of India. His ships laden with African gold and Chinese silk, he was the first European to reach India via the sea route. And when he stepped onto the shore of Calicut, a new era began, the age of European colonialism. The Portuguese had established a number of trading posts in the 16th century, but their hold over the lucrative trade was threatened by other European powers. Soon, the Spanish conquered the Aztec and Inca empires in the Americas, but others joined the race to establish dominance over the Asian markets. The Dutch, the French, and above all, the English. They founded East India companies to oversee their trade in the Orient, and trade became the new battlefield. India, Southeast Asia, Africa, all became prizes in this global competition. Here's how the scramble for Asia started. In 1592, Queen Elizabeth I of England granted a royal charter to the English East India Company, which gave it the monopoly to trade in Asia. What followed was nothing short of an economic blitzkrieg. Within 2 decades, the company grew to become one of the largest in the world. It had a fleet of over 100 ships and employed more than 12,000 people, 1/3 of whom were Englishmen, the rest were Indians, mostly from the western coast. They were employed as administrators, soldiers, merchants, clerks, and translators, and the mother country benefited enormously from this arrangement. Between 1593 and 1615, the English East India Company shipped nearly 1.5 billion pounds of silver to England. That's equivalent to nearly $40 billion today. But this windfall did not bring any lasting prosperity to the region. Most of the wealth generated by the colonies was siphoned back to England. For India, the arrival of the British East India Company marked the beginning of a long and checkered chapter, one that would drain the subcontinent of its wealth and leave it politically fragmented. In the early years, the British focused primarily on trade. The French and the Portuguese were quick to establish military superiority. In 1638, the Portuguese captured the island of Bombay from the Kingdom of Gujarat. 3 years later, the French colonized the town of Pondicherry on the Coromandel coast. But gradually, the English too built up their military might. By 1661, they had acquired a small fort at Surat and a few other trading posts along the west coast. And these military outposts acted as anchors for the missionaries who then ventured inland. Their objective: convert the natives to Christianity and in the process, undermine traditional Hindu society. By the late 17th century, European powers were fighting each other in India. The British were pitted against the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, and the Danish. All of them were fighting to control the spice trade. But it was the French who proved to be the stiffest competitors. They were well entrenched in the Carnatic and in Bengal, where they controlled the lucrative textile trade. In 1744, the British and the French went to war in India. It was called the Battle of the Plassey, and it was a turning point in Indian history. The French defeat at Plassey marked the beginning of British hegemony in India. Over the next 2 decades, the British East India Company crushed all opposition, and by 1765, it had acquired territorial rights over most of Bengal. This period also saw the rise of powerful local rulers: the Marathas in the west, the Sikhs in the northwest, and the Mysore Kingdom in the south. All of them opposed the British, but none could stop them. The English were simply too powerful. By the 19th century, Britain's Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and it needed raw materials from its colonies. So the focus shifted from trade to resource extraction. Under the British Raj, the Indian subcontinent became a supplier of raw cotton, opium, and jute to British mills. Meanwhile, finished British goods flooded the Indian market. This, coupled with discriminatory economic policies, ruined traditional Indian industries such as textiles. So the story of European colonialism is a tale of two Indias, the one that ruled the seas and the other that toiled on the land. One that traded spices and the other that extracted resources. One that dreamed of empire and the other that endured the hardships of servitude. Yet despite the odds, Indians found ways to thrive. They became soldiers in the British Army, administrators in the civil service, lawyers in the courts, and doctors in the hospitals. They took the ideas of the Enlightenment back to India and inspired generations to fight for independence. But that's a story for another day. Bien Bo Gig T Hainung Gi Ziva Gi LCH SENH Nal K NG HM Nay Top SMT Trong Nung Fong CL Dum T CTVN Nang Shavit Si Ziva Net Siagi Trunho YHN Selingling NM Kun 1200 Turchak Kang Nian Ki Giffy CHAC Min TTN Gi Trung Ho Ji Gira MTV San Tu Ji Lu Ju Thing Tin H Kik Chilan Exong Mai Nung Mun Exong Kang Chahun Thun Loth CNG Sigi CSDNG Trong Niel Quan Trong Ca Triu .ng YSNG CCL Tran Exong Hoek Myrat O ALADA Nun Viet Anti-Zoot Anti-Zoot E8 E8 GCGIITR ATR TVPHI KOCHNG MIVT KH CTRXMG LAP MTCUHIMTLICU NUI N Hoik MTSS Kian Quan Trung T Nung DV Mung Fit T Choan Chin Dutch Quan SS Haney LSTT TT Sihu GGC Gidu Mi CTVN KHNG CHS MTCO Tonkien CVL CHS Malata Haihu VAGGI Santin Thine CA Gay Giziva Qua Ta DGGC EMY Quan HMT Thit Gia Kongi VVI Thine Lin Gat Yongig Trong Quan Nium Gag Trung Ho C I Vi C High EV C High EN Ra CT VNU KR Shi Thay I Hi U by T C8AV Luch SP Venmin Trung Ho KHNG CHNSTNTIC A Tri U ICA Tri U ING Ma Cho Thi H Thung Chavit Trung Ho G Trien TR TS M NH NG Top Y Trong C TV NHM Nay Lot KT Ku CAMT Tri NVN LU Day TNH NGKHC NGN Banyu Chavit Trung Ho DN Tin H CNG PH CTP Tin VH Nay IU NGC Ni N La Ni UKT Trong CTV NV and the Nan Ra Trong Chia Hi and ID NHC H E NH TMT TRI Hey You Nuyat MT Trang VNju C Dom CBN CBN CT VN La Min Ching Cho SS Thing Min Song TOC A NGI XA Do KXNG CNG, NGH-Ni, HVN, RALU, Trian Kien C, VN Cho, H Sao, CM BN Theo DI Video, NU3NG QNL, LI Like NG, KNK Way NH, G Kang BNL Nung Video via Luch, SVNV, HNG PLI, Bun Trong Video Tip Theo. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. From the end of the 16th century to the middle of the 18th century, Europe experienced profound changes in the field of science that revolutionized its understanding of the natural world and laid the foundations for modern science. This period, known as the Scientific Revolution, marked a significant departure from the medieval worldview and ushered in a new era of discovery and innovation. Let's explore this fascinating period in history. The Scientific Revolution was a period of rapid scientific and technological advancements that took place in Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries. It was a time when scholars and scientists challenged long-held beliefs and made groundbreaking discoveries about the natural world. Now the question arises, why did this happen in Europe? Well, there were various factors that contributed to the rise of the scientific revolution in Europe. Firstly, the Renaissance played a significant role, as it marked a renewed interest in classical learning and a shift away from the medieval focus on religion. The rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman texts inspired European scholars to pursue knowledge and understanding of the natural world. Additionally, the patronage of the arts and sciences by wealthy individuals and families, such as the Medici in Florence and the Gonzaga in Mantua, provided a conducive environment for intellectual pursuits. Another crucial factor was the development of new technologies, such as the printing press, which allowed for the dissemination of ideas and knowledge on a wider scale. The printing press enabled scholars to communicate their findings to a broader audience, fostering collaboration and building upon each other's work. Moreover, advances in navigation and shipbuilding, spurred by exploration and trade, led to new discoveries and a broader perspective of the world. As European explorers ventured into uncharted territories, they encountered new cultures, plants, animals, and celestial phenomena that challenged existing knowledge and sparked curiosity. Furthermore, the establishment of scientific societies and institutions, such as the Royal Society in London and the French Academy of Sciences, provided a platform for scholars to share their work and receive recognition. These institutions facilitated communication, organization, and funding for scientific research, contributing to the growth and development of the scientific revolution. So now you know how this revolution started. What did it actually cover? The scientific revolution encompassed several key areas of scientific inquiry that revolutionized our understanding of the natural world. One of the most significant areas was astronomy. Nicolaus Copernicus, a Polish astronomer, published the heliocentric theory, which placed the sun, rather than the Earth, at the center of the solar system. This revolutionary idea challenged the long-held geocentric view and provided a more accurate explanation for astronomical observations. Tycho Brahe, a Danish astronomer, made precise observations of celestial bodies, including the discovery of a new star, which later became known as a supernova. His meticulous work laid the foundation for Johannes Kepler's laws of planetary motion, which described the elliptical orbits of planets around the Sun. Galileo Galilei, an Italian astronomer and physicist, made groundbreaking discoveries using his telescope, including the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and the surface features of the Moon and planets. His observations provided strong evidence for the heliocentric theory and expanded our understanding of the solar system. Galileo also made significant contributions to the study of motion and is considered the father of classical mechanics. Another important area of scientific development was physics. Sir Isaac Newton, an English physicist and mathematician, developed the laws of motion and universal gravitation, which explain the behavior of objects in motion and the forces acting upon them. His masterpiece, the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, laid the foundations of classical physics and provided a comprehensive description of the laws governing the physical world. Newton also made contributions to optics, calculus, and the theory of colors. Moving on to mathematics, the scientific revolution witnessed significant advancements that expanded the scope and power of mathematics. Descartes, a French mathematician, developed analytic geometry, which introduced the use of coordinates to represent points, lines, and curves on a graph. This innovation laid the foundation for the relationship between algebra and geometry, providing a powerful tool for solving problems in science and engineering. Pierre de Fermat, a French mathematician, made significant contributions to number theory, probability theory, and the calculus. He developed the method of least squares for finding the best fit line through a set of data points. And his work on probability theory laid the groundwork for the development of statistics. Furthermore, the scientific revolution also saw advancements in other fields such as chemistry, biology, and medicine. Robert Boyle, an Irish chemist and physicist, is considered the founder of modern chemistry. He discovered the properties of gases and made significant contributions to the understanding of chemical reactions and the development of the scientific method. Anton van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch scientist, was the first to observe and describe microorganisms such as bacteria and protozoa, using his improved microscope. His discoveries opened up a new world of microscopic life and revolutionized the study of biology. But how did these scientists work? What tools did they use? And where did they publish their findings? The scientific method is a systematic approach to acquiring knowledge and understanding the natural world. It involves observation, experimentation, and the formulation of theories based on evidence. During the scientific revolution, scientists began to rely less on ancient authorities and more on observation and experimentation to understand the natural world. They emphasized the importance of empirical evidence and the use of reason and logic to draw conclusions. Observation and experimentation were fundamental to the scientific method. Scientists made careful observations of natural phenomena and conducted experiments to test their hypotheses. They used instruments such as telescopes, microscopes, and precision tools to gather data and make precise measurements. For example, Galileo Galilei used his telescope to observe the moons of Jupiter and the phases of Venus, providing evidence for the heliocentric theory. Isaac Newton conducted experiments with falling objects to develop his law of universal gravitation. As for the tools, let's talk about the printing press. The printing press was a revolutionary invention that had a profound impact on the spread of knowledge and ideas during the scientific revolution, invented by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440. The printing press enabled the mass production of books and other printed materials, which facilitated the dissemination of scientific discoveries and theories. Before the printing press, books were labor-intensive to produce, making them expensive and rare. But with the printing press, the process of printing became faster, cheaper, and more efficient. This allowed for the wider distribution of scientific texts and the exchange of ideas among scholars. For instance, the printing press played a crucial role in the spread of Nicolaus Copernicus's heliocentric theory, which challenged the prevailing geocentric view of the solar system. Once printed, his ideas could be shared and debated across Europe, sparking further scientific inquiry and discussion. Similarly, Isaac Newton's groundbreaking work, The Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, was published using the printing press, allowing for the wider dissemination of his laws of motion and universal gravitation. The printing press also facilitated the creation of scientific journals and periodicals, which provided a platform for scientists to share their findings and engage in scholarly discussions. It fostered international collaboration and the exchange of knowledge among scientists across borders. Overall, the printing press was an indispensable tool during the scientific revolution, enabling the rapid spread of scientific discoveries and ideas that shaped our understanding of the natural world. Now, how did they keep a record of their findings? To record and communicate their findings. Scientists during the scientific revolution primarily used written texts and mathematical notation. Written texts were essential for documenting observations, experiments, and theories. Scientists kept detailed laboratory notebooks where they recorded their observations, data, and experimental procedures. These notebooks served as a record of their work and helped them track their progress and findings. For example, Isaac Newton's notebooks contain his groundbreaking work on calculus, laws of motion, and the theory of gravity. In addition to written texts, scientists also used mathematical notation and equations to express their discoveries and relationships. Mathematics provided a precise and rigorous way to describe the workings of the natural world. For instance, Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica presented his laws of motion and universal gravitation using mathematical formulas and equations. This allowed for the clear representation of complex concepts and facilitated the communication of scientific findings to a scholarly audience. The scientific revolution had profound implications for our understanding of the natural world and laid the foundations for modern science. The heliocentric theory, the laws of planetary motion, the laws of motion, and universal gravitation revolutionized astronomy and physics. Advancements in mathematics such as analytic geometry and calculus provided powerful tools for scientific inquiry. The emphasis on observation, experimentation, the scientific method, marked a shift towards a more empirical and rational approach to knowledge. Furthermore, the printing press played a crucial role in the spread of scientific discoveries and ideas. It enabled the mass production of books and scientific journals, fostering international collaboration and the exchange of knowledge. The works of Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton stand as monumental achievements that shaped our understanding of the universe. Their discoveries and theories paved the way for future scientific advancements and continue to influence our exploration of the cosmos. The scientific revolution marked a transformative period in human history, laying the groundwork for modern science and shaping our perception of the natural world. The contributions of these brilliant minds continue to inspire awe and wonder, reminding us of the boundless curiosity and intellectual capacity of the human spirit. Thanks for watching. The year is 1789. Where do we find the most enlightened place on Earth? Well, if you said France, you'd be wrong. See, Enlightenment had nothing to do with light bulbs. It was an intellectual movement that spread through Europe in the late 18th century. It emphasized reason, individualism, and human progress. The word enlightenment itself means becoming light or educated. So, where did this enlightenment start? Let's go back in time to find out. Meanwhile, back in Europe, while scientists roamed the skies, philosophers brought their gaze down to earth. They pondered about the purpose of human life, the nature of the universe, and the role of government. Scientists might have discovered a world full of wonders, but philosophers asked, what does it all mean? Enter the Age of Enlightenment, also known as the Neoclassical period. The name itself sounds like some fancy hair gel or a New Age band from New Zealand. But don't let the name fool you. This was serious stuff. Enlightenment thinkers questioned everything, even the divine right of kings. In the grand halls of Paris and London coffee houses, debates sparked like firecrackers on New Year's Eve. The air crackled with ideas that challenged everything people knew. The Age of Enlightenment marked a shift in how people viewed the world and their place in it. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit room filled with people from different walks of life. There's a lawyer, a doctor, maybe even a duke or two. Suddenly someone says, hey, why do we believe in this or follow that king? Whoa, that's a thought. People began questioning long-held beliefs and traditions, including those of the church. They started to think for themselves. This questioning paved the way for major changes, not just in the drawing rooms of Europe, but across the globe. One of the biggest names during this time was the French philosopher Voltaire, who was born in 1694. He was a true rebel who used his writing to attack injustice and superstition. Think of him as the original Robin Hood, except instead of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, he stole words. No, seriously, he wrote over 20,000 letters and more than 200 books, pamphlets, and plays. One of his most famous works was a book called Candide. It was like a cosmic joke, poking fun at everything from religion to philosophy. Voltaire believed in religious tolerance and freedom of speech, and he was unafraid to speak out against the powerful, even if it meant getting kicked out of the king's court. Once they banished him from France for criticizing the government, so he spent 3 years in England, soaking up the atmosphere of intellectual freedom. When he came back to France, he kept writing and kept speaking out until one day they finally silenced him, sort of. He died in 1778, but his ideas lived on, inspiring people to challenge authority and stand up for what they believed in. Then there was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, born in 1712. Unlike Voltaire, Rousseau wasn't a fan of big cities. He preferred nature, his own thoughts, and writing about how society corrupts our natural goodness. His most famous work, The Social Contract, shook things up by saying that governments should get their power from the people they rule. This idea flipped the traditional view of power. Imagine if your dog could suddenly take away your food bowl just because he wanted it. That's kind of what Rousseau was challenging. He argued that the government's job was to protect the people. and that the people had the power to change or even overthrow their leaders if they weren't doing a good job. His ideas were like a match to the powder keg of revolution, especially in France, where the people were fed up with the king's lavish lifestyle and lack of concern for their struggles. John Locke, born in 1632, was an English philosopher whose ideas were like a bomb dropped in the middle of 18th century England. His book, The Second Treatise on Civil Government, was a game-changer. He talked about natural rights, the idea that everyone has certain rights just because they're born a human. He said that people are born with the right to life, liberty, and property, that the government shouldn't take those rights away. Imagine going to the beach and someone telling you couldn't collect seashells because the king owns all the shells. That's kind of what Locke was against. Its ideas were like a catalyst, speeding up the already rumbling revolution in America. These philosophers weren't just talking for the sake of it. Their ideas spread faster than wildfire in a dry forest. And no wonder that is. Their ideas were revolutionary, challenging the established order and giving voice to the voiceless. They inspired ordinary people to think extraordinary thoughts and to question the status quo. The ideas were like seeds planted in fertile ground, waiting for the right conditions to grow. And boy, did they ever grow. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the 13 English colonies in North America were feeling the heat. They were tired of being faraway subjects of the mighty King George II. They didn't have much say in how they were governed, and they were fed up with the taxes and laws that the King's Parliament passed without any input from them. The journey from Boston to London was long and expensive, so most colonists couldn't just hop on a boat and tell the king exactly what they thought. So instead, they did what any reasonable people would do. They talked about it. They met in secret societies, debated in taverns, and wrote fiery pamphlets that made their way to the hands of fellow colonists. It was a hotbed of discontent, and ideas were brewing like a storm on the horizon. Enter the Declaration of Independence, a document that changed the course of history. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted this declaration written by Thomas Jefferson, which proclaimed that these colonies are, and by the right of the Constitution of the people, ought to be free and independent states. It was a bold statement, a daring challenge to the mighty British Empire. The war that followed was just as dramatic. Imagine walking into a boxing ring where the opponent is a heavyweight champion. That's kind of how the Americans felt facing off against the British. But they had a secret weapon: France. You see, France had been nursing a grudge against Britain since the 7 Years' War, which ended with Britain winning some key territories in North America. France saw an opportunity to strike back and decided to secretly help the colonists win their independence. And it wasn't just financial aid. France sent in some of the best military minds and soldiers to assist the Americans. General Rochambeau, for example, played a pivotal role in planning and executing the siege of Yorktown, which eventually led to the British surrender. After 8 long years of fighting, the war came to an end. The Treaty of Paris officially recognized the independence of the United States, and with that, a new nation was born. Imagine going from being a rebellious teenager to an independent adult. It's kind of what happened to the United States. And leading this new nation was George Washington, the general who wouldn't quit. He was the hero of the hour, the man who led the Continental Army to victory against all odds. After the war, he became the first president of the United States, setting the tone for the new nation. So there you have it, a revolution fueled by ideas and a nation built on principles. The Age of Enlightenment had taken root and blossomed into something extraordinary. But remember, ideas don't just pop out of nowhere. They build on what came before. Just like the philosophers and revolutionaries of the 18th century stood on the shoulders of those who came before them. Similarly, we today continue to build on the legacy of those who dared to dream of a better world. So keep asking questions, keep challenging the status quo, and keep working towards a brighter future. After all, the flame of enlightenment is still burning, and it's our duty to keep it alive and let it shine for generations to come. But if America showed the way, France soon exploded. The people suffered hunger and heavy taxes, while King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette lived in splendor. When the Queen was rumored to have said, "If they have no bread, let them eat cake," it did not amuse anyone. It enraged them. In 1789, the French Revolution began. Crowds stormed the Bastille prison, a symbol of royal power. The streets echoed with a new slogan: liberty, equality, fraternity. The monarchy fell, and the guillotine became the blade of justice. King and queen both lost their heads. Europe shook with fear. If the French people could kill their king, who was safe, Madame Deficit, as we saw in Part 1, was not just a French problem. It was an American problem, too. It's 1787, the United States was deep in debt. The American Revolution had cost a pretty penny. Now, the government in Philadelphia wanted to do some nation building. They wanted to build roads and canals and other public works. They needed money, and so they turned to a man called James Madison. Madison was a delegate from Virginia. He was also the father of the U.S. economy. His plan was simple. The government would assume all the debts of the states. In return, the states would give the federal government power to tax. The states agreed. But while America heaved a sigh of relief, Europe was about to blow up. The year is 1789. The place is Paris. The French are angry. They're angry because there is no bread, or so little bread that people have started eating dogs. They're angry because they pay high taxes, but get no representation. They're angry because the king looks down at them from his palace and laughs. That's right. King Louis XVI was the laughing kind. While his people starved, he partied. He hosted lavish dinners, spent money on fancy clothes, and once unleashed poisonous snakes into the audience at the opera. But the people had had enough. They were done with the king's callous attitude. He stormed the Bastille, a huge prison that looked like a medieval castle. It had been built in the 14th century. For 400 years, it had held criminals and political prisoners. Now, it was being attacked by an angry mob. Inside the prison were only 7 inmates. The mob did not care. They killed 4 of them, chopped off the head of the governor, and raised a flag above the prison walls. It was a red flag with a blue, white, and red design. We know it today as the French flag. The attack on the Bastille was the beginning of the French Revolution. The revolution lasted for 10 years. During this time, the French people overthrew the monarchy, ended feudalism, and established a republic. Do you remember the slogan of the French Revolution? Liberty, equality, fraternity? These ideas spread like wildfire. People came out on the streets. They tore down the statues of kings and queens. They defaced churches. Soon, the revolutionaries found the king and queen in a particular humiliating situation. King Louis XVI had fled Paris. He was hiding in a wig shop. Can you imagine a king hiding in a wig shop? The revolutionaries did not find it funny. They dragged the royal family from the wig shop to a nearby church. Then they marched all of them to Paris. The journey from the wig shop to Paris is now called the March of the Revolution. It is celebrated every year on the streets of France. Louis XVI was tried and convicted of treason. The 29-year-old king was sent to the guillotine. The queen was not spared either. Marie Antoinette was only 37 when she met her end at the guillotine. The French Revolution threw up many such young heroes and villains. Maximilien Robespierre was one of them. He was only 36 when he took charge of France. Robespierre was a lawyer by profession. He became a leader of the revolution. With the help of a special court, he unleashed a reign of terror. More than 17,000 people were put to death during this time. Robespierre himself was guillotined in 1794. His head was cut off when he was just 39. The French Revolution left Europe in a tizzy. If the French people could behead their king, then no European monarch was safe. Soon, revolutionaries were knocking on the doors of the aristocracy. They killed nobles, they murdered princes and princesses, they looted palaces and burnt down entire villages. So how is France different from the other kingdoms of Europe? Why was it the first to fall? First, France had a bad king. Louis XVI was weak and indecisive. He kept postponing important decisions. Second, France had a bad queen. Marie Antoinette was hated by the people. She was considered an outsider. You see, Marie Antoinette was the daughter of an Austrian emperor. She had married Louis XVI when she was just 14. So much for a happy childhood. No wonder she spent her days shopping and playing with dolls. The French people had none of these luxuries. They were hungry and angry and desperate for change. Finally, France had a bad financial system. The king spent money like there was no tomorrow. The Queen added to his expenses. The treasury was bleeding. France needed urgent money. This led to heavy taxation. The poor got poorer. The rich left France and took their money elsewhere. Soon, the entire country was bankrupt. Did you know that the French centers of learning? Paris was home to many brilliant scientists. Napoleon Bonaparte was born here. So was the painter Edgar Degas, the French centers of art. Eiffel was born in the town of Dijon. So was the Impressionist painter Claude Monet, the French centers of fashion. Paris still sets the fashion for the world. So what if France was the first to fall? It rose again to become one of the most powerful countries in the world. Meanwhile, in the East, India had its own tale. The once glorious Mughal Empire, so proud under Akbar and Shah Jahan, was weakening. Into this vacuum crept the British East India Company. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, Bengal came under their control. Slowly, piece by piece, India slipped into British hands. Farmers still tilled the fields, weavers still spun cotton, but much of their wealth sailed away to London. Oppression was heavy, but in those dark days, the seeds of resistance were planted, seeds that would one day grow into the struggle for independence. Across the world, the French centers of power were crumbling. In America, the colonists had revolted. They wanted no more taxes from the British. They wanted representation in Parliament. And in the year 1800, they overthrew British rule. This was a momentous event. A new nation was born. It was called the United States of America. In India, similar rumblings could be heard. People began to ask, why should the British collect taxes? Can't we make our own laws? We have our own customs, our own traditions. Why must we follow British rules? And when Indians asked these questions, they were not put in jail. At least not yet. Not in 1800. But the British did not take any chances. They knew that America had shown the way. So they tightened their grip on India. They built more factories. They brought in more soldiers. They also played one princely state against the other. But the Indians had tasted freedom. Now they wanted it back. The first shots were fired at the same place where the last Mughal emperor was living in exile. This is Murshidabad in present-day West Bengal. In 1810, a man named Raja Ram Mohan Roy started a secret society here. Its name was the Brahmo Samaj. Its members were educated, well-to-do Indians. They wanted real reform, a return to the ancient Hindu way of life. They opposed sati, the system where a widow was expected to sacrifice herself by burning alive on her husband's funeral pyre. They also worked to abolish the caste system. But the British saw all of this as a threat to their rule. Soon, secret societies were banned and their leaders went to jail. Raja Ram Mohan Roy died in 1833. Many of his followers took his mission forward. One of them was a young man called Dadabhai Naoroji. He studied in London. He became an influential member of the British Parliament, and he used that position to speak about Indian grievances. Meanwhile, others took a different route. They started newspapers and wrote about the evils of British rule. One such newspaper was called The Englishman. It was started by two brothers, G.K. Gokhale and Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Their paper was unabashedly pre-Indian. They wrote about poverty, about famines, about how the British were draining India. Their articles incited violence, and that's why in 1906 they were arrested and sent to jail. Now the British had a problem. Indians were beginning to unite. They were talking about their shared history, their culture, their grievances against the British. And the British knew if this trend continued, their hold over India could collapse like a house of cards. So they changed their strategy. They started a new institution. It was called the Indian Civil Service. The lure was irresistible. All the perks of British jobs, the pay, the status, the travel, and it was open to Indians too. There was just one catch. You had to become an Englishman first. You had to give up your Indian identity. Many Indians took the bait. They joined the civil service. They forgot their mother tongue. They dressed up in English clothes and they became loyal servants of the crown. But not everyone could become an ICS officer. Most Indians were still out of luck. They had no voice in the government. They were not allowed to enter public buildings. And if they protested, they were beaten up or put in jail. Among them was a young man called Mahatma Gandhi. He had studied in South Africa. He had seen how people there fought against the British. And when he returned to India, he started organizing. He led protests, he courted arrest. In 1915, he was called the father of the Indian unrest by a British judge. and that's when the plan for complete independence was hatched. This was the turning point because now the goal was clear. India wanted full independence, not just political rights or representation in parliament. They wanted to chart their own future, to decide their own destiny. So the 18th century became an age of transformation. Science challenged the heavens, Enlightenment challenged kings, America declared freedom. France guillotined monarchy, and India began to feel the iron grip of colonialism. The world was shifting, trembling, reshaping itself. But my Indian friends, the story does not end here. The next century, the 19th, will thunder forward at the speed of a steam engine. The Industrial Revolution will roar with machines, Napoleon will rise to dominate Europe, and revolutions will erupt across nations. It will be an age where invention, empire, and freedom movements all collide to create the modern world. And let's start our story in England in 1750. Here we meet James Watt, an ordinary man with an extraordinary idea. He tinkered with steam engines, those beasts that chugged and hissed, powering factories and machines. And Watt had a dream, wanted to make them better, to make them more efficient so they could power even greater things. Wouldn't you know it, his tinkering paid off. He improved the steam engine so well that it could now do one thing like drive a mill or pump water out of a mine, but two things at once, perhaps even powering a ship on the high seas. This breakthrough would change everything. It would launch a revolution that would reshape the world. Oh, but what was this revolution called? Drumroll, please. The Industrial Revolution. You see, this revolution was powered by the mighty steam engine. With its pistons pumping and wheels turning, this invention led to massive growth in industries like textile, iron, and steam engine production itself. Can you imagine the impact? Factories sprang up, churning out goods like never before. Entire communities shifted to these factory towns, becoming urban workers. Trade boomed as new machines like the spinning jenny and the power loom produced goods faster than ever before. My friends, the Industrial Revolution would fundamentally alter the course of human history. Now, why was Britain the first country to embrace this revolution? Well, several factors converged to make it happen. First, Britain had abundant access to coal and iron, essential resources for building machines and powering factories. Second, they had ample access to water, thanks to their many rivers, which were harnessed to turn the wheels of industry. And third, Britain had a strong agricultural base. The agricultural revolution had boosted food production, leading to a population boom and a workforce ready to fuel the factories. Finally, the British had accumulated significant wealth through colonialism, giving them the resources to invest in new technologies and ventures. These factors combined to create the perfect conditions for the Industrial Revolution to take root and flourish. However, my dear viewers, progress often comes at a cost. And the Industrial Revolution was no exception. Working conditions in factories were often hazardous. Machines had no safety features, working hours were long, and child labor was rampant. Living conditions in the crowded cities were deplorable. There was inadequate housing, rampant poverty, and the constant threat of disease loomed large. My friends, it was a stark contrast to the glorious vision of industrial progress. But amidst these challenges, seeds of change began to sprout. Reform movements advocating for safer working conditions, reasonable hours, and child labor laws started to gain traction. The plight of the workers began to capture public attention and stir calls for action. The Industrial Revolution had ignited a fire that would eventually transform the social, economic, and political landscape of the world forever. Meanwhile, across the seas in France, a brilliant strategist named Napoleon Bonaparte was about to seize power and rewrite history. Back in the late 18th century, France was a powder keg ready to explode. The American Revolution had shown people the power of democracy and fueled calls for change in France. Then came the French Revolution with its radical ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. It shook the foundations of French society and brought Napoleon to the forefront. Napoleon, a brilliant military strategist, seized control of France in a coup d'etat, ending the French Revolution and establishing the French consulate with himself as first consul. Soon, he crowned himself emperor, marking a dramatic shift in power. His reign would forever alter the course of European history. Now under his rule, France experienced a period of stability and prosperity, known as the Napoleonic era. Napoleon introduced significant reforms in areas like law, education, and administration, which were admired throughout Europe. But his ambitions didn't stop there. He went on to conquer much of Europe, spreading French revolutionary ideals wherever he went. His victories against the Austrians at Coroncebus solidified his reputation as a military genius. However, his empire would ultimately crumble after his disastrous invasion of Russia. Defeated and exiled, Napoleon's story came to an end in St. Helena, a tiny island in the Atlantic Ocean. His legacy, however, lived on, leaving an indelible mark on Europe and the world. Napoleon's conquests had spread revolutionary ideas across the continent, contributing to the decline of feudalism and the rise of nationalism. Moreover, the Napoleonic Wars inadvertently helped to forge a sense of European identity, laying the groundwork for the continent's unity in the centuries to come. Despite his ultimate defeat, Napoleon's impact on history was profound, cementing his place as one of the most iconic figures of the 19th century. But hold on to your seats, because we're about to embark on a journey across the ocean to the Americas and witness the birth of a new nation. It's the year 1803, and tensions are high. For decades, the United States has been simmering with discontent over the British practice of impressment, forcing American sailors into the Royal Navy. Tensions boil over when the USS Chesapeake is attacked by the British warship HMS Shannon. This conflict sparks outrage in the U.S. President James Madison, backed by influential figures like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, declares war on Great Britain, kicking off a conflict that would become known as the War of 1812. As the war rages, the Americans face both triumphs and setbacks. Early defeats in the Northwest Territory and on the Great Lakes lead to a strategic retreat. However, the tide begins to turn with the victory at the Battle of Lake Erie, under the command of Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry. This victory not only secures American control of the lake, but also boosts morale and confidence in the face of adversity. As the war continues, the United States remains committed to defending its honor and protecting its interests on the high seas. The conflict becomes a defining moment in the nation's early history, shaping its identity and setting the stage for its future as a global power. Across the Atlantic, another struggle for freedom is brewing. It's time in Latin America. The Spanish colonies in the Americas have long endured the oppressive rule of Spain. But now, a wave of change is sweeping across the region. Inspired by the ideals of the French Revolution and the success of the Haitian Revolution, revolutionaries like Simon Bolivar, José de San Martín, and Miguel Hidalgo y Castilla rise to challenge the status quo. They ignite the flames of rebellion, calling for independence and self-governance. The Spanish colonies unite in a common cause, determined to break free from colonial rule and forge their own path to freedom. The fight for independence is far from easy. The colonial powers are formidable opponents, utilizing their military might and vast resources to suppress the revolts. But the revolutionaries are undeterred. They engage in guerrilla tactics, exploiting their knowledge of the terrain and unwavering commitment to the cause. The struggle intensifies, leading to crucial battles such as the Battle of Carabobo, which marks a turning point in the fight against Spanish rule. As the momentum for independence grows, the Latin American colonies inch closer to freedom, paving the way for new nations in a transformed political landscape in the Western Hemisphere. But our journey doesn't end here. We must now turn our attention to India and explore how it navigates the tumultuous waters of colonialism during this era. In India, the East India Company, a powerful trading entity, has established a significant presence. Initially focused on trade, the company gradually expands its influence, amassing wealth and exploiting the vast resources of the subcontinent. However, their dominance leads to growing discontent among the Indian rulers and populations. The company's practices spark resentment and opposition, setting the stage for a clash between colonial authority and indigenous aspirations for self-determination. As tensions rise, the Indian soldiers, known as sepoys, employed by the East India Company, begin to voice their grievances. Dissatisfaction culminates in the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857, a major uprising against the company's rule. The mutiny reflects deep-rooted anger over the exploitation, cultural insensitivity, and perceived injustices inflicted upon the Indian people. The revolt sends shockwaves throughout the empire, exposing the fragility of the colonial order and the limits of the company's authority. In the aftermath of the mutiny, the British Crown takes direct control of India, marking a shift in the dynamics of power and foreshadowing the challenges ahead for the colonized world. And as we navigate through this turbulent era, we witness the profound impact of colonialism on various parts of the world. From Latin America to India, the desire for independence and self-determination emerges as a powerful force, challenging the existing colonial order. But don't go anywhere, because we've only just begun to tell the story of the 19th century. Join us in the next episode as we continue to explore the captivating events that shaped this era. Don't forget to subscribe for more updates, and let us know what you think in the comments below. Till then, keep learning and stay curious. In the 18th century, there were storms of revolution across the world. America broke free of the British Empire. France overthrew the rule of kings and established a republic. And ideas of liberty and equality swept through Europe and the rest of the world. But one thing was missing from these revolutions. Power was still concentrated in the hands of a few. Either it was the king or the priests who guided the masses. After the French Revolution, when Napoleon was crowned emperor, he boasted, "Lec mich Europa," Europe is mine. In Russia, a new Tsarina took the throne. She was called Catherine the Great. She ruled like a goddess. In China, the last Qing emperor was only 19 years old. In India, the British East India Company lorded over millions, but change was afoot. After the storms of revolution in the 18th century, humanity entered a new age, and this time, the guide was not a king or a priest, but a machine. In England, wheels spun, furnaces roared, and factories rose like mushrooms after rain. It was an economic revolution powered by machines, and it changed the course of human history. Let me show you around. Welcome to the first episode of our series on the Industrial Revolution. In the early 18th century, England was a predominantly agricultural country. About 80% of its population lived in villages and small towns. They were farmers, artisans, or shopkeepers. Life was hard. There were famines, epidemics, economic crises, but then came peace. England fought no major wars during this period. This gave the English the opportunity to focus on trade and industry. They began exploring new technologies, new ways of producing goods, and what they needed was fuel. Coal was the fuel of choice. Today we know coal is terrible for the environment, but back then, it was a godsend. Coal-powered machines could produce goods faster and cheaper than ever before. They could turn day into night and make endless copies of anything from pins to steam engines. In fact, that's what happened. Between 1700 and 1850, industrial production increased tenfold in England. How did they do it? With one machine? It was invented by Thomas Savery in 1698. Its inventor called it the indefatigable engine. James Watt improved it, polished it up, and made it into something powerful. The new engine had two important characteristics. 1, it could burn coal. 2, it produced a tremendous force called steam. Basically, water boiled inside the machine, turned into steam, and pushed the pistons. This reciprocating motion of the pistons was then converted into rotary motion, and voila, you had an engine. Now this engine could power anything from factories to pumps to mills to ships. So with the steam engine, Britain had cracked the code of industrial production. They had a source of energy that could power their economy. The question is, how did they use it? See, the steam engine itself cannot produce goods. It needs human intervention. And this brings us to the second element of the Industrial Revolution: machines. These were complex devices that operated with the help of moving parts. This included spinning jenny, the power loom, the steam hammer, the threshing machine, the excavator, and many more. Put together, the steam engine and these machines lowered production costs and increased output. For example, with power looms, weavers could make twice as much cloth as before. With excavators, miners could dig through more coal. With threshing machines, farmers could separate grain from chaff faster. So far, so good. What else did they need? They needed raw materials. Iron, coal, cotton, yarn, textiles. All of these were key ingredients of industrialization. And where did they get them from? They got them from colonies. Think about it. What was the point of industrializing? If you couldn't sell your goods anywhere, you needed markets. Colonies were captive markets. They bought raw materials cheap and sold finished goods in return. explains why every powerful European country had a colony. Britain had India, France had Vietnam, Portugal had Brazil, the Netherlands had Indonesia. They were all feeding their factories. But colonies were not enough. To produce goods on a massive scale, you needed huge amounts of capital. Where did the money come from? From merchants and factory owners? Well, yes, but also from a new class of investors, shareholders. They pooled in money, bought shares in companies, and earned profits without working. This was a big shift. Till then, merchants and traders ran businesses. They took risks, traded, and hoped to make profits. But now investors wanted a guarantee. They wanted to be sure that they would earn returns. So factory owners came up with an idea. They invited public investment. They said, "We will run the business and give you the profits." And this gave the Industrial Revolution some stability. Now, all these elements were essential to the Industrial Revolution. Steam engine, the machines, the raw materials, the capital, all of this worked together to produce goods cheaply and in large quantities. So far, we have talked about how the Industrial Revolution began. Next, let's talk about its effects. For the first time in history, industry was producing more goods than people could consume. They did not know what to do with all those goods. So they did one thing. They began exporting them. In other words, the era of globalization began. Goods flowed from the west to the east. Manufactured goods from England reached India and China. Raw materials from Asia went to European factories, and this led to a strange situation. Europe got wealthier, Asia got poorer. And how did people contribute to this? We told you that the Industrial Revolution brought along a new class of investors. It also brought along a new class of workers. Earlier, artisans used to make goods by hand. Industrialization replaced them with machines. People were forced to leave their homes and move to cities. By 1850, London had become the most densely populated city in the world. At least 1 million people lived here, maybe even more. Most of them were migrants looking for work. They worked in factories for long hours, sometimes 16 hours a day, were paid very little. There were no holidays, no weekends. Machines did not care about age or gender. Men, women, and children toiled endlessly. It was in these dark factories that new ideas were born. Workers began organizing themselves into labor unions. They demanded better wages, shorter hours, cleaner environments. On the other hand, factory owners wanted more productivity, lower wages, and longer hours. So the struggle was inevitable. Out of this struggle emerged some of the most influential ideas of the modern age. One of them was communism. Its most famous exponent was a man called Karl Marx. He wrote a book called Das Kapital. In it, he analyzed the capitalist system. He described the struggles between factory owners and workers. And he imagined a world beyond capitalism, a world without exploitation, a world without inequality. According to him, the workers would eventually rise and take over the means of production. Then everyone would be equal. But that's a story for another day. Right now, let's go back to 19th century England. Britain was the first country to industrialize, but it wouldn't remain the only one for long. Soon other countries followed suit. Germany and the United States became industrial powers. They too had colonies, factories, machines, and capitalists. Industrial revolution was changing the world, was creating immense wealth, was also widening the gap between the rich and the poor. But one thing was certain, there was no going back. We are living in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, all of us. In the late 18th century, England took the title of the workshop of the world. English textiles, iron products, and machines were in demand all over the world. However, the Industrial Revolution did not bring peace and quiet to the old continent. In fact, it was precisely during this period that one man shook Europe to its core. A man whose name is still synonymous with the word conqueror, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon I, Emperor of the French, King of Italy, as well as a member of the Legion of Honor, the Military Order of St. Louis, and dozens of other orders and titles. The history of Napoleon's rise and fall has been known for centuries. But if you ask any schoolchild who he was, the answer will be succinct. Corsican artillery officer who once tried to conquer the whole of Europe. There is some truth to this definition, but we have in mind only one. How did Napoleon become the most famous person on the continent? What was his personality like? How did his contemporaries see him? Let's find out more. Corsica, which in ancient times was a part of the Republic of Pisa in 1768, became a part of the Kingdom of France after the Treaty of Versailles. It's a rather small island, and the locals didn't hold back when talking about newcomers from France. They considered them arrogant, rude, and stupid. Corsica was seen as a distant province. Moreover, Corsicans disliked mainlanders for taking away the island's autonomy. When a baby boy named Napoleon was born in the city of Ajatocho on August 15, 1769, people still felt the bitterness of the recent conquest. And so Napoleon was born under the sign of an outsider. The Bonaparte family was not poor by provincial standards. His father was a member of the local parliament, and his mother was the daughter of a well-to-do family. Napoleon had 4 siblings. As a child, he grew up playing in the streets of Ajaccio, fighting with street urchins and visiting taverns. Young Napoleon spoke French with a strong Corsican accent. In addition to his native language, he learned Italian and spoke it perfectly later in life. When Napoleon was 9 years old, his father sent him to study at a boarding school in the city of Brienne, famous for its military school. After graduating from which, according to tradition, young men went to serve in the army. Napoleon graduated with honors and got a job as an artillery officer in the Royal French Army at first. His career at the post did not progress, but nevertheless, Napoleon was considered a smart guy. The artillery officers considered him the smartest of their colleagues. In 1785, Napoleon got a job at the artillery school in France and began to train young artillerymen. But soon, like many of his contemporaries, he decided to go to Paris to try his luck there. This period of his biography is shrouded in myths and legends. According to one version, in order to pay for housing, Napoleon put his furniture out into the street and rented it out as stalls. According to another version, he worked as a pimp, renting out rooms in a hotel owned by his friend's mother. In reality, Napoleon probably did odd jobs and earned money by private lessons. A year later, Napoleon returned to his artillery regiment and went with it to aid the American colonies in the war against the British. This plan was never realized, because the French king at that time canceled the military alliance with the Americans. Instead, he began secret negotiations with the British and signed the Treaty of Paris. Returning to France, all the territories captured by the Americans, except for the former French colony of Louisiana, which was sold to the United States. After returning home, Napoleon devoted all his free time to studying military theory. In total, he read between 300 and 400 books on the subject. In addition, Napoleon studied the geography of the countries of Western Europe, drew maps, and constantly did exercises in his head. It was thanks to this preparation that when the revolution broke out in France in 1789, Napoleon was able to quickly make a brilliant career. On July 14, 1789, the Parisians stormed the Bastille prison, an event that served as the starting signal for the revolution. Then came the storming of the Tuileries Palace, the abolition of the monarchy, and the establishment of the First French Republic. Due to his origin, Napoleon was suspected of being a royalist, and even spent a few weeks in prison. However, he proved himself so valuable as a military leader that no one remembered his former troubles. In the early days of the Revolution, the Jacobin held the reins of government in France. This radical party wanted not only to overthrow the king, but also to execute him. In September 1792, Louis XVI was indeed executed on the guillotine. However, the radicals did not stop there. They unleashed a reign of terror in the country. In just a couple of months, more than 17,000 people were executed in Paris alone. Napoleon, although he did not belong to the Jacobin, was well disposed towards the revolution, considering it a progressive movement. At the same time, he realized that the country was going crazy. So when in October 1795, the revolutionary leaders decided to arrest several members of the Committee of Public Safety, including Maximilien Robespierre, Napoleon sided with them. With the help of his friend, General Lafayette, Napoleon led the troops into Paris and dispersed the crowd that had gathered to protest the arrests. Thus, he saved the revolution and ended the reign of terror. The next day, Robespierre was arrested and sent to the guillotine. Napoleon's reputation as a strong leader was established, and everyone started talking about him. It seemed to many that the brilliant general would now come to power and plunge France into chaos and violence. However, this did not happen. On the contrary, Napoleon resigned from the army and retired to his estate in Corsica. Many of his relatives died believing that he had gone crazy. But Napoleon was preparing for a new, greater glory. In 1796, the French Republic declared war on Austria. Napoleon was given command of an army of 40,000 troops, which he managed to bring to 180,000 in less than a year. Thanks to Napoleon's efforts, the French invaded northern Italy. His brilliant victories in the battles of Montagnat, Dago Lodi, and Rivoli helped to establish French dominance on the Italian peninsula. Napoleon's fame reached its peak. The grateful Parisians gave him the hand of a beautiful Josephine de Beauharnais, the widow of an executed revolutionary. Together, they had 4 children. But the Corsican general was not satisfied with what he had achieved. His ambitions knew no bounds. While conquering Italy, Napoleon made plans to capture Egypt. He believed that whoever ruled Egypt controlled the entire Mediterranean. In May 1798, Napoleon invaded Egypt with a 35,000-strong army. But the campaign failed. Lacking supplies, Napoleon had to return to France, where he was greeted as a hero. Back in Paris, Napoleon staged a coup d'état, which made him the first consul of the Republic. Soon after, the title of First Consul turned into the title of Emperor. On December 2, 1804, in the Cathedral of Notre Dame, Napoleon crowned himself the first Emperor of France. From that moment on, he became the most powerful ruler on the continent. During his reign, he waged wars against Austria, Prussia, Russia, Sweden, Britain, and their allies. His grand army numbered 500,000 soldiers. Napoleon dreamed of conquering all of Europe. He was stopped only by the Russian winter and the British army under the command of the Duke of Wellington. Finally, on June 18, 1815, Napoleon was defeated in the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon's wife, Josephine, could not bear children, so in 1810, Napoleon married Marie-Louise, the daughter of the Austrian emperor. This marriage was purely political and was supposed to end the war with Austria. But in 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate in favor of his son, Napoleon II, and went into exile on the island of Elba. 1 year later, having learned about Napoleon's escape from exile, the Allies invaded France and captured the Corsican. They took him to the island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean, where he spent his last years writing his memoirs. Napoleon I died on May 5, 1821. Napoleon's historical legacy is enormous. Despite the fact that he practically did not rule in France for 10 years, he issued a new legal code, which is still in effect in many countries today. Napoleonic ideas of equality before the law, the abolition of feudalism and religious privileges, as well as the introduction of meritocracy, influenced the development of Europe for many years. Napoleon was also a brilliant military leader who won more than 60 battles, created a strong centralized state in France, and reformed almost every sphere of public life. Napoleon may have been a controversial figure, but one thing is for sure: there was no one like him in the whole of Europe. Meanwhile, in the East, India faced its own turning point. The once mighty mules had grown weak, and the British East India Company was no longer just a trading house. It was becoming a ruler, so the real power lay with the company. They had their own army, their own civil servants, and soon they would have their own king. In 1857, anger burst into the Sepoy Rebellion, when Indian soldiers in the company's army rose up. They were called Sepoys. They were furious at oppression and even insults to their faith. One story goes that a rumor spread that the new Enfield rifle cartridges were greased with the fat of cows and pigs. Now, this was an insult to 2 religions, to Hindus and Muslims. So the Sepoys refused to accept these cartridges. When they were forced to, they tore open the packets, bit into the cartridges, and spat on the ground. This is how the story goes. But whether or not it's true, it doesn't really matter, because what happened next is very real. On March 29, 1857, 80 sepoys were put on trial for mutiny. They were in Barakpur near Calcutta. The British officers said the sepoys had committed an act of insubordination. They were told to either accept the cartridges or leave the army without your head. So the sepoys refused to accept the cartridges. Then they were all put on trial. Now, some accounts say that one of the sepoys present there shouted, "Is this the justice we get? We are prepared to lay down our lives." And then he shot himself. The other sepoys followed suit. All 80 of them blew their brains out rather than submit. The British were shocked. They realized that the soldiers were not just angry about the cartridges. They were angry about their pay, their promotions, their future. In fact, they were angry about the whole system. And what happened next was nothing short of a revolution. From Meerut, the rebellion spread like wildfire, Boys stationed across the northwest province rose up, that's today's Uttar Pradesh. They seized the fort at Meerut, then they headed to Delhi. On May, they entered the city and proclaimed the old Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, the second in charge. His son, who was in British custody, was released, and he too joined the rebellion. Soon, Delhi became the center of the movement. Leaders from across the country joined the soldiers here. There were meetings, conferences, committees, all to plan the next move, to take on the British. But the British were better equipped. Their forces were much larger, and the soldiers were better trained. Slowly, the British started to gain the upper hand. By the end of July, they had captured Delhi. The rebels were pushed back. Bahadur Shah Zafar was taken to Rangoon. He died there in 1862. The rebellion was over, but the struggle had just begun. Leaders like Nana Sahib and Rani Lakshmibai kept fighting. They took on the British, attacked rail lines, post offices, telegraph lines. They knew that the British would stop at nothing to crush the rebellion, so they kept moving. They fought from cities, from jungles, from hill forts. Even after their armies were defeated, they kept the spirit of the rebellion alive. The First War of Independence is what this uprising is called. It shook the British Empire. London was stunned. They realized that the Indians were not going to accept their rule lying down. Sure, the rebellion was crushed, but its impact was far-reaching. The British were now more cautious. They knew they could not rule India through a puppet emperor. They needed direct control. So they passed the Government of India Act in 1858. It dissolved the East India Company and made the British Crown the direct ruler of India, but that's not all. This act also introduced a new system, a council that would advise the viceroy, a legislative body that would make laws for the people. Elections were held and Indians were given representation in the government. Of course, this did not apply to the princely states, but the rest of the country was slowly introduced to the idea of self-rule. The seeds of democracy were sown, though the harvest was still many years away. So was the First War of Independence a success or a failure? Well, that's for you to decide. Did the British give up and leave India? No. Did Indians get their freedom? No. Did the movement lay the foundation for future struggles? Absolutely. You see, revolutions don't always succeed in the first attempt. Sometimes they succeed in setting the future in motion. If you think about the history of the last 2 centuries, what comes to mind? Perhaps the French Revolution, or perhaps the American War of Independence. Well, if you said that, then you were only half right. Yes, those revolutions did play a role in shaping the world we live in today. But there is so much more that happened in the 18th and 19th centuries that really explains how the world changed. So let's try again. Let's start with India. For centuries, the subcontinent had been ruled by local princes with nominal allegiance to an emperor in Delhi. But that changed in the 18th century. A trading company, which was initially given the task of overseeing trade in the region, grew in influence and power. And after that, the company was stripped of power, and India passed directly under the crown of Britain. The era of the British Raj began. To the British, India was the jewel in the crown of Queen Victoria. To Indians, it was the land where nationalist ideas began to grow, seeds that would one day blossom into independence. And what does this mean for us today? Well, first off, the Indian population grew exponentially during this time period. In 1800, India had around 200 million people. By the end of the century, it had 370 million, a growth of over 80 million. That made it the most populated country in the world. Second, industrialization came to India. Factories sprung up across the subcontinent, producing textiles, glass, steel, and other goods. These factories attracted a growing population of urban workers. The third, the railways arrived. As the largest country in the world, India needed a quick and efficient way to move people and resources. The trains were originally used to transport troops and materials. However, they soon proved useful for moving passengers too. Soon, different regions of the country could trade their goods with each other. Then we have the French centers of power shifting. See, when we talk about France in this period, we often think about the French Revolution and Napoleon. But what happened next? After Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, France had lost much of its power and prestige. However, it wasn't completely done yet. In the following decades, France experienced a period of rapid economic growth and territorial expansion. This period is known as the Second French Revolution. During this time, France became a major colonial power. It had vast territories in Africa, Asia, and South America, so the French gained some of their former power back, but not all of it. Then there's Germany, who went through something similar. In 1848, there was a wave of revolutions across Europe. In Germany, the revolutionaries demanded a constitution and an end to absolute monarchy. Although the uprising was eventually crushed, it did lay the groundwork for the unification of Germany. Two leaders played key roles in this process: Count Otto von Bismarck and King Wilhelm I. Their goal was to unify the many small German states into one strong nation. Bismarck's strategy was known as Realpolitik, or real politics. This was a policy based on practical considerations rather than ideals. For example, Bismarck was willing to make deals with other countries, even those with whom he had previously fought. Through a series of wars and diplomatic maneuvers, Bismarck succeeded in unifying Germany in 1871. The new German Empire stretched from the north, sea to the Baltic, and included over 100 million people. The economy was booming, fueled by industrialization and colonialism. Germany had become a major power on the world stage once again. Finally, let's look at Russia. The Romanov dynasty had been in power since 1613. Peter the Great had modernized the country, and Catherine the Great had expanded its territory, but after her death in 1796, Russia fell into decline. The next two emperors were weak and corrupt. One of them, Alexander I, spent most of his time at his country estate, while his wife, Empress Elizabeth, ran the government. As a result, discontent grew among the Russian people. Many of them felt that their interests were being ignored by the ruling class. In addition, the serfs were still in bondage. They weren't allowed to leave their master's land, and they had to work for low wages. This led to a number of rebellions throughout the century. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire was collapsing. Ever since the middle of the 17th century, the Ottomans had been in decline. They had lost much of their territory to the Russians and the Austrians. Additionally, internal rivalries and corruption had weakened the central government. With all of these problems, it's no wonder that the Ottomans were unable to resist the coming storm. The Crimean War was the first major conflict between the Russians and the Ottomans. It was fought from 1853 to 1856 and resulted in an Ottoman victory. However, this was only a temporary reprieve. The Russians would soon be back with a vengeance. In 1875, the Russo-Turkish War broke out. The Russians easily defeated the Ottomans and captured the city of Constantinople. This effectively ended the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Japanese also underwent significant changes during this time period. For centuries, Japan had been a closed country. It had very little contact with the outside world. However, in the mid-19th century, the United States forced Japan to open its doors to trade. This event, known as the Black Ship Incident, had a profound impact on Japanese society. The Japanese quickly realized that they were far behind Western powers in terms of technology and military strength. They knew that they had to change in order to survive. And so began the Meiji Restoration. Over the course of the next few decades, Japan would undergo a complete transformation. It would become a modern, industrialized nation. It would also become a major colonial power. By the end of the century, Japan had become one of the most powerful nations in the world. Now, all of these changes can seem overwhelming, but they can be broken down into three main categories. First, there was the rise of nationalism. This was the belief that a nation should be ruled by its own people. It led to the unification of Germany and Italy and the independence of many Latin American countries. Second, there was the growing gap between rich and poor. Industrialization created a new middle class, but it also led to widespread poverty. This inequality would eventually lead to the Russian Revolution. Finally, there was the scramble for Africa. As European powers colonized Africa, they would exploit its people and resources. This would have a lasting impact on the continent and set the stage for future conflicts. In addition to these major changes, there were also a number of smaller ones. For example, in 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. This book revolutionized our understanding of the natural world. Darwin argued that species evolve over time through a process called natural selection. This challenged the prevailing belief that species are fixed and unchanging. Another important development was the invention of the telephone. In 1876, by Alexander Graham Bell, this invention allowed people to communicate over long distances instantly. It would change the way we do business and interact with each other. And lastly, the discovery of penicillin in 1928 by Alexander Fleming revolutionized medicine. Penicillin is the first antibiotic, a drug that can kill bacteria without harming human cells. It has saved countless lives and helped to eradicate many deadly diseases. So what does all this mean? Well, simply put, the world was changing in big ways. New technologies were being developed, old empires were falling apart, and new ones were being formed. It was a time of great upheaval and change, but it was also a time of great progress. Human ingenuity and innovation seemed boundless. There was a growing sense of optimism about the future. People believed that science and technology would continue to improve our lives. This period would set the stage for the 20th century and the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. The world of the 19th century was a place of great change and upheaval, but it was also a time of great progress and innovation. It was a world where the old order was being challenged and where new ideas and new ways of doing things were emerging. It was a world where the possibilities for the future seemed limitless. And it was a world that we should all strive to understand better, because it is ultimately a world that we help to create. But that's not all. We want to know what you think. What are your thoughts on the 19th century? What were some of the biggest changes that happened during this time, and how did these changes affect your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, if you want to keep learning about the past, you've come to the right place. We've got thousands of videos here on YouTube that bring history to life. From ancient civilizations to modern times, we cover it all. And don't forget to subscribe for more epic historical tales. Thanks for watching. Here's the problem with history. There are moments in time so big, they completely change how things are. You know those moments? You've heard of them? The French Revolution, the American War of Independence, maybe the building of Rome. We all know these moments when something ends and something new begins, but there's a problem here. Those moments don't just appear out of nowhere. They build, they grow, they develop over years and years until boom, they change everything. So now, it's not enough just to cover the moment itself. If we really want to understand what made the French Revolution happen, we have to go back and look at France in the years before. What was life like? What were people thinking? Why were the ideas fermenting for revolution? And if we can do this, we can actually understand why these events happened, how they happened, and importantly, learn from them. This is our history. And so, as the 19th century closed, humanity stood on the edge of an even greater storm. The 20th century was waiting, with 2 world wars, with leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, with revolutions that would reshape nations. The world was about to fight, bleed, rebuild, and rise again. Yet none of this could have been imagined in 1899. The world was entering the next phase of human history without knowing it. But let's go back to 1899 and see what the world was like. See, that's the only way we'll understand why the 20th century turned out the way it did. Let's get into the time machine. All right, and we're in London. It says the year 1899, and we read just a few months away from the beginning of the 20th century. Now you might think that wouldn't be so different. It's still Europe. So let's quickly travel around Europe to see what life is like. So we're in Paris now, and if we walk down the Champs de Mars, we can see the Eiffel Tower in the distance. It's just been refurbished for the 1889 World S Fair, and it's one of the most popular sights in Paris, and what we can hear. Though above the clip-clop of horses is the rumble of something else. There's traffic now in Paris, lots of cars and bikes and buses, but also new contraptions called automobiles, horseless carriages. These things run on gasoline, and some people think they're the future. But others worry that these vehicles are polluting the city. And it's not just Paris. Cities across Europe are getting crowded, dirtier, and noisier than ever before. We're in Berlin now and walking around. It's obvious that Germany is a very different place than it was 100 years ago. A lot of this has to do with its leader, Otto von Bismarck, unified Germany into an empire in 1871. Since then, Germany has become an industrial powerhouse. In fact, it's become so powerful that other European countries are starting to worry. Just last week, France and Britain met up with their navies in a show of force against Germany. It was called the Naval Conference of 1898, and it was basically a warning to Germany, telling them to cool it with all the military spending. But it didn't work. Germany isn't slowing down. They're actually planning on expanding their navy even more. But as we wander through Berlin, it's clear to us that all of these changes aren't affecting everyone equally. Many Germans are living in poverty, especially the working class, who often work long hours in terrible conditions. Actually, it's so bad in Berlin that socialists are planning a major strike to protest the living conditions. Will it work? Who knows? But it is obvious that many Germans are upset with the way things are going right now. Okay, we're going to go far from Europe now and head to the Ottoman Empire. We're in Istanbul, and it is night, and it looks like your typical Middle Eastern city, right? It's dark, it's dirty, it's loud, and there are people everywhere. But we know the secret. This city used to be called Constantinople, and it was the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of the Roman Empire, for over 1,000 years. That was until the Ottomans invaded and captured the city in 1453. Ever since then, the Ottoman Empire has been on the decline. Western powers have been taking advantage of the Ottomans and exploiting their resources and wealth. And right now, the Ottoman Sultan is desperate to make his empire great again. He's already started modernizing his army, his education system, and his factories. But it's not enough. Is the Ottoman Empire about to make a comeback, or will it keep declining into the 20th century? All right, now we're in New York City. It's the end of the 19th century and the United States is booming. For the last few decades, the U.S. has been growing faster than any country in history. Much of this growth comes from immigrants who come to the U.S. for new lives. In fact, about half of all Americans alive today can trace their roots back to immigrants during this period. And these immigrants are heading straight to cities like New York, where they can find jobs and housing, and the chance to climb the social ladder. But with so many new immigrants moving in, New York City is changing. Not everyone's happy about that. Some Americans are trying to stop immigrants from moving to the U.S., and others are protesting the poor living conditions created by so much rapid growth. Even worse, Americans are fighting each other over land. Farmers are moving west to take advantage of cheap land, and Native Americans are being pushed off of their ancestral lands. Is the United States about to enter a new era of growth and opportunity, or is it headed for conflict? Well, thank you so much for riding along today. I hope you enjoyed this tour of 1899. I know I sure did. There's nothing like traveling back in time and seeing how people lived, what they were thinking, and what problems they were facing. But now, I want to ask you a question. What surprised you about 1899? Was it the automobile? What about the tensions between European powers or the plight of the Ottoman Empire? Let me know in the comments section below. And while you're down there, remember to click the subscribe button, because then you'll never miss out on any of our videos. Also be sure to click the bell icon, because that LL makes sure you get notified every time we upload a new video. And now, it's time for a little homework. Before we wrap up today, I want you to take a moment to think about the world in 1899. What was it like? What problems were people facing? We'll write a paragraph or two describing what you think life was like in 1899. Then share it with us in the comments section below. I'd love to read what you come up with. All right, everyone, it's time to wrap things up. So I want to say thanks to all of our supporters for making videos like this possible. And now I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. When you're thinking about the world in 1899, what kind of changes do you think we'll see over the course of the 20th century? Well, leave your thoughts in the comments section below. All right, everyone, thanks for joining me today. I hope you learned something. And if you want to keep learning, just click on this little dude right here. He'll take you to a bunch of other awesome history videos. I'll see you next time. All right, let's go back to our history book. Oops, sorry, it seems someone ate it. Never mind. Let's get the story from where we left off. The year is 1899, and the British are running the Indian subcontinent like it's their personal estate. The Indian soldiers are serving in the British Indian Army, and they all set to fight for the British in South Africa. But here's the thing. The British officers don't really seem to know how to lead. They've given the Indian soldiers outdated weapons and are treating them like second-class soldiers. Even their uniforms are hand-me-down from the Victorian era. No wonder the Indian soldiers aren't too happy about this. Enter Paul Kruger, President of South Africa. He leads the Boers, a group of Dutch descendants who are fighting against the British to gain control of South Africa. Now, President Kruger isn't really fond of Indians either. He sees them as cheap labor brought in by the British to take away jobs from the locals. So when the Indian soldiers arrive in South Africa, Kruger decides to treat them the same way he treats the British bad. This doesn't go down too well with the Indian soldiers. After all, they're fighting for the British. So why are the British letting South Africa mistreat them? This resentment grows into anger, and at the Battle of Belfast, something incredible happens. The Indian soldiers refuse to follow orders. They lay down their arms. They don't want to fight for the British anymore. They're arrested. Some are put on trial for mutiny. And guess what? They're acquitted. The British can't prove mutiny because, well, they can't prove they gave the order to open fire. Meanwhile, word of the Indian soldiers' bravery reaches India. People all over the country start talking about it. And who is leading this conversation? None other than Mahatma Gandhi. He calls the Indian soldiers in South Africa the true sons of India. And that's when the idea of satyagraha, or resolute nonviolent resistance, enters the chat. See, Mahatma Gandhi has been in South Africa for quite some time now. And during this time, he's seen firsthand the power of satyagraha. When he was arrested for protesting against the discrimination of Indians in South Africa, his fellow citizens in India started a massive nonviolent protest. The British couldn't handle the massive wave of satyagraha. They had to release him. And that's when Gandhi realizes that satyagraha can be a powerful tool to fight against injustice, not just in South Africa, but also in India. But hold on. Before we get carried away with the whole satyagraha in India thing, we need to address a little detail. See, Mahatma Gandhi wasn't the only one who got inspired by the Indian soldiers' bravery in South Africa. There was another leader in South Africa who was very impressed by their courage. A leader who would go on to become a legend, a leader with the unique name of Winston Churchill. Yes, that Winston Churchill. You know, the guy who later on became the Prime Minister of Great Britain and was in charge of most of the British Empire's policies during World War II. Well, young Winston Churchill was in South Africa during the war, and he saw the Indian soldiers fighting the Boers alongside the British. And what does he do? He writes a story about them. He sends the story back to England, and voila, the Times of London publishes it. And guess what? It's a sensation. Everyone in England is talking about these brave Indian soldiers. Suddenly, everyone wants to know more about India, and then something unexpected happens. Lord Curzon, Viceroy of India, decides to cash in on this popularity. He organizes a grand exhibition in London called the Indian section of the Colonial and Indian Exhibition. It's a huge success. Everyone who visits the exhibition wants to know more about India. So much so that the British government sets up a special inquiry to find out if there's anything the British Raj could do better in ruling India. The report of this inquiry becomes known as the Morley-Minto Reforms, and guess what it brings? A whole bunch of changes in the British Raj. For example, the report recommends a big increase in the pay of the soldiers in the British Indian Army. Finally, they'll have decent clothes and decent weapons. Plus, there's going to be an elected legislative body in India. Whoa! Looks like the Indian soldiers in South Africa just triggered a massive political reform in India. Now, that's all for today, my friends. Do let us know in the comments below what you think of the Indian soldiers who fought in South Africa. Also, do remember to subscribe if you haven't already,